My king, I beg you, spare my sons. They are young.
Night hangs heavy over the hills of Gibeah. A lone figure kneels on the rocky ground, hair wild, clothes torn, skin bruised by sun and wind. Her lamp flickers beside her, barely holding against the wind. She has been here for days, weeks. Soon it will be months. Her hands tremble, but she does not move. Her eyes, deep, burning, unbroken, are fixed on the bodies of her sons. 7 sons, 7 innocent sons. They hang from a tree on a hill, cursed by betrayal, politics, and vengeance. She has built no tent. She has eaten little. She sleeps only when exhaustion forces her down, but she refuses to leave them. Her name is RIZPAH. And this is the story of the mother who stood between the dead and the vultures and changed a king's heart. The famine did not strike Israel all at once. It did not come with thunder or storms or warnings carved in the sky. No, its arrival was slow, quiet, almost deceitful. It crept into the land like a thin shadow, stretching itself across fields and villages until darkness swallowed everything. It began in the first year with the skies. Clouds that normally drifted gently over Israel seemed to vanish without explanation. The heavens grew empty, strangely pale. Day after day, the sun rose over a cloudless horizon, burning the ground with a heat that felt unnatural. Farmers lifted their faces toward the sky, shielding their eyes with rough, sun-scarred hands. "It is only a delay," they said to one another. "The rains will come." But they did not. The earth hardened. Streams shrank into muddy trickles. Fields that once stood tall with barley and wheat bent under the scorching sun and faded into sickly yellow. Women walked farther each morning, searching for water to cook or clean, often returning home with only a few meager drops. Men ran their fingers through the soil and watched it crumble like dust between their hands. Still, hope lingered. "Next week," they said. "Next month, soon." But the second year arrived, and with it came a hunger that awakened fear. The drought deepened. The sun grew fiercer, almost cruel, pressing down on Israel like a punishment. Wells that had served families for generations dried up one after another. People traveled from village to village with buckets and jars, only to return empty-handed. Children grew thin, their ribs jutting against fragile skin. Lips cracked. Eyes dulled. The nights were filled with the soft, heartbreaking cries of little ones who could not understand why their stomachs were never full. Rivers that once roared with life shrank into thin scars of cracked mud. Even the great Jordan, the pride of the land, seemed to gasp for breath. Animals collapsed where they grazed, sheep, goats, donkeys, too weak to rise from the dusty ground. Their cries echoed through the night, haunting, mournful. Merchants abandoned their roots. Marketplace stalls that once overflowed with grain, fruits, and spices now stood empty and silent. People walked through them like spirits, their footsteps echoing in a market without life. Fear became a constant visitor in every home. Whispered conversations filled the evenings. What sin has brought this upon us? Why has the Lord turned away? What wrong have we done? But no answer came. Then the third year arrived, and hope itself seemed to die. The famine was no longer a threat, it was a ruler. It clung to the land with ragged claws, refusing to release its grip. The earth lay barren. Trees that once shaded families and offered fruit now looked like skeletons, their branches brittle and leafless. Grass was nothing more than a memory. Israel, once described as a land flowing with milk and honey, had become a wasteland. Families rationed crumbs. Mothers held their children through the night, unable to soothe their hunger. Old men sat in silence, their faces hollow, their spirits broken. Everywhere on the roads, in the fields, at the city gates, the famine followed, silent and cold. People no longer asked if God was angry. They feared they already knew the answer. A whisper spread from house to house, from village to city. This is not a natural famine. God himself has shut the heavens. It was a terrifying thought, yet it rang true. Nothing about this drought felt ordinary. It felt intentional, deliberate, like a message written in suffering. Israel's suffering deepened with each passing day. Parents told stories of their ancestors, of Moses and manna in the wilderness, of Elijah calling fire and rain from heaven. But even these miracles felt like distant stories from a world God had turned his face from. And underneath the hunger, the fear, the desperation, one truth pulsed quietly through the land. Something was terribly wrong, something ancient, something unresolved. A sin buried in Israel's past, forgotten by people, but not forgotten by God. This famine was not nature. It was a signal, a divine summons, a judgment rooted in an old wound, tied to the blood of innocent men, to a promise broken, to a king who violated the sacred law of protection. And at the heart of that story was a woman named RIZPAH, a mother whose love, grief, and unwavering devotion would shake the kingdom and move the heavens themselves. The famine was only the beginning. The truth, painful, hidden, and soaked in tragedy, was waiting to rise to the surface. And Israel would never be the same. King David could no longer ignore the suffering of his people. 3 years of famine had drained the strength of Israel, and the cries of hungry families reached the palace every day. Though he was king, he felt powerless. Every resource had been exhausted. Every attempt to revive the land had failed. The heavens remained silent. The earth remained closed. Nothing changed. And so David did the only thing left to do. He went before God. He entered a place of prayer with a heavy heart, burdened by the weight of a nation starving under his leadership. He fell to his knees, lifted his face toward the unseen, and poured out his questions with desperation. O Lord, why has this famine come upon us? What have we done that you have closed the heavens? Show me the cause so that your people may live. David waited. The silence stretched. But then, slowly, like a heavy veil being lifted, the answer came, not through thunder or fire, but through a divine revelation so sharp it pierced the very core of the king. The famine had not come because of David's sins or the sins of the people. It was not caused by negligence, failure, or natural decline. No, the reason was far older, buried in the rule of a previous king, hidden beneath layers of time, forgotten by men, but remembered by God. The famine was a judgment, a divine reaction to a bloodstain on Israel's history. And the voice of the Lord made it clear. It is because of Saul and his bloody house. Because he killed the Gibeonites. The words struck David like a blow to the chest. Saul, Israel's former king, the man who had once been anointed to lead God's people, had broken a sacred oath. Centuries earlier, long before Saul was born, Joshua had made a covenant of protection with the Gibeonites, a promise sworn before God that Israel would spare their lives. That covenant was binding forever. But Saul, in a misguided attempt to cleanse the land, had attacked the Gibeonites, shedding innocent blood and violating a vow sealed in God's name. It was a sin that had gone unanswered, a wound that had never been healed. And now its consequences had fallen on David's generation. The heavens were shut because justice had not been done. David felt the weight of it, an ancient sin, buried yet not forgotten, pulling down the entire nation. The famine had been the voice of God calling Israel to face what had been ignored. David rose from the place of prayer with trembling hands. His face was pale. His jaw was tight. The revelation thundered in his mind. A king's sin had brought a nation to its knees. And the Lord had spoken again, clearly and without mercy. Asterisk, to lift the curse, justice must be done. Asterisk, the words echoed in David's spirit. Justice, not sacrifice, not ritual. Justice for the innocent blood spilled. The land could not heal until the wrong was made right. This knowledge was heavier than any crown David had ever worn. He knew what it meant. He would have to face the Gibeonites. He would have to ask what justice required. And whatever the cost, he would have to give it. For Israel to live, the past had to be answered. The sins of a former king had returned like a shadow, demanding reckoning. And David, though innocent of Saul's crimes, would have to carry the burden of restoring righteousness to the land. As the king stepped out of the place of prayer, his thoughts were clouded, his heart pounding with the weight of the truth. The famine was no longer a mystery. It was a curse with a name, a curse with a cause. And now it was up to him to break it. David did not delay. The moment he received God's revelation, he sent messengers to summon the Gibeonites, those quiet, foreign descendants who lived scattered within Israel's borders, survivors of a covenant older than kings. They arrived not in armor or with pride, but with the gravity of a people who had carried silent pain for years. Their faces were marked by hardship, by memory, by wounds no one had ever tried to heal. David met them with humility. He did not sit upon his throne. He stood before them as a man, not as a king, fully aware that the fate of Israel rested upon this conversation. His voice was steady, but his heart trembled beneath his robes. "What shall I do for you?" he asked. "How shall I make atonement so that you will bless the inheritance of the Lord again?" The Gibeonites exchanged glances, long, heavy, knowing looks that spoke of old grief. They had not come to bargain. They had not come to be soothed by royal words. One of them stepped forward, his voice low and rough, shaped by years of injustice hidden under silence. "It is not silver or gold that we want from Saul's house," he said. "We will not accept riches, nor do we seek a treaty of peace." David felt a chill crawl down his spine. If they did not want gold, and they did not want land, and they did not want favor, then their desire was deeper, older, sharper. "Tell me," David pressed gently. "Whatever you ask, I will do." The man's eyes burned with a sorrow that had fermented into something harder. The man who consumed us, who planned to destroy us, who sought to wipe us from Israel's borders, he is dead. The name was unspoken, yet its shadow filled the room. Saul, the former king, the anointed one who had treated the Gibeonites not as covenant-protected neighbors, but as enemies to be destroyed. Another Gibeonite stepped forward, his hands trembling with emotion. But his bloodline remains, his house still stands, and the land feels the weight of his sin. A long silence stretched between them, a silence thick as smoke, heavy with the cost of judgment. David's breath grew shallow. He felt the walls closing in. "What do you ask?" he whispered, though part of him already knew the answer. The Gibeonite leader stepped forward, his voice steady as stone. "Let 7 men from Saul's descendants be handed over to us. We will expose them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, his own town." The words struck the room like a physical blow. 7 men, sons, grandsons, blood of Saul, life for life, justice for bloodshed. David felt his legs weaken. He gripped the edge of a nearby table to keep himself upright. The weight of leadership pressed upon him like a mountain of iron. 7 lives, 7 families, 7 futures. This was not a small request. It was not a political demand. It was a cry for blood justice, a divine, ancient type of reckoning. The Gibeonite leader continued, his voice low. "We do not ask this lightly, but the blood Saul shed must be answered. Innocent lives were taken. Our families were destroyed. Our men were hunted. Our covenant was violated. His voice cracked, and heaven has testified. Israel suffers because justice has not been done. David's throat tightened. He knew they were right. The famine, the drought, the hunger, these were the echoes of Saul's forgotten cruelty. And God had already declared what must be done. The land would not heal until justice was satisfied. Slowly, painfully, David nodded. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "What you have asked, I will do." The Gibeonites bowed not in triumph, but in solemn acceptance. They had not wanted revenge. They had wanted righteousness. They had wanted closure for a wound left open for far too long. When they departed, the room felt colder. David stood motionless long after they were gone, feeling the weight of the decision settle into his bones. 7 sons of Saul, 7 branches of a once-honored house, 7 sacrifices demanded not by men, but by heaven itself. The king closed his eyes, and for a moment he felt the sorrow of a nation pressing upon him. The road ahead was dark, and the cost of justice was only beginning. When the decree spreads through the palace corridors, it travels like a cold wind, silent at first, then sharp enough to cut the heart. Someone whispers it near the courtyard. Another repeats it near the servants' quarters. Before long, the entire household of Saul trembles with the knowledge. 7 sons from Saul's lineage will be taken. 7 sons for 7 years of guilt. 7 sons to quench the blood that still cries from the land. Rizpah hears the news not with her ears first, but with her bones. Something inside her cracks the moment a trembling hand touches her shoulder and says, "They have named the ones to be taken." She turns slowly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile world she knows is about to shatter. Her voice is a whisper, thin as a thread. "Who?" The servant cannot meet her eyes. He looks at the ground. Armoni and Mephibosheth, her sons, her only sons. The names float in the air like a death sentence spoken by an invisible judge. Rizpah feels the breath leave her body. For a moment, she does not cry. Her grief is too heavy for tears. It sinks deeper, pressing against her lungs until she cannot draw in air. "No," she finally breathes. "No, not my boys. They are innocent. They have done nothing." Her voice breaks, splintering like a clay jar thrown against stone. She leaves the room before anyone can stop her. She moves through the palace like a storm, hair undone, feet barely touching the ground, her heart pounding with the desperate rhythm of a mother who will not stand idle while death draws near. She reaches David's hall, the king's chamber where guards stand like carved statues. She pushes past them, unthinking, uncaring, her only desire to reach the one man who can overturn the decree. But even kings cannot break an oath made to God. David steps forward when he sees her. The grief on her face strikes him like a spear. He knows the weight of his decision. He knows what it means to condemn children for the sins of a dead king. But he also knows the famine, the dying people, the divine silence that has lasted 3 long years. He knows what he must do, yet knowing does not shield him from the sight of this broken woman standing before him. "My king," Rizpah cries, bowing low, her hands trembling. "I beg you, spare my sons. They are young. They had no part in Saul's sin. They did not even understand the war he waged. Spare them, I beg you. Take me instead. Take my life, but not theirs." Her voice rises not loud but fierce, the raw cry of a mother robbed of hope. "Have mercy, David. You are a father. You know the love that binds flesh to flesh." David closes his eyes for a moment as though he cannot bear to look at her. When he finally speaks, his voice is heavy, dragged down by the burden of kingship. "Rizpah, I cannot. The oath is made. The Gibeonites will accept nothing else. If I break this covenant, more blood will fall on Israel, more famine, more death. Her knees weaken. She falls to the floor. But the king continues, his voice trembling with sorrow. This is not a punishment for your sons, not for you. It is the price of Saul's house, the price of broken promises. He pauses, the weight of the words suffocating them both. If there were another way, God knows I would choose it. Silence, thick, suffocating. Then the sound of footsteps, heavy ones. The guards approach, but they hesitate, waiting for the king's signal. RIZPAH looks up at them, eyes wide with terror. She knows what their presence means. She knows why they have come. No, she whispers, scrambling to her feet. No, please. But the guards step forward. Her sons are brought out. Armoni tall, gentle, barely a man. Mephibosheth quiet, thoughtful, his eyes always soft like his father's. They do not fight as the guards place their hands on them. They look at their mother with sorrow, not fear, because their greatest pain is her pain. Mother, Armoni whispers, trying to be brave. Do not weep, but RIZPAH does. She weeps until her voice is a broken river, and her tears fall like rain that cannot extinguish the fire burning inside her. She reaches for them, but the guards hold her back. She claws at their arms, screams their names, tries to press her face into her son's shoulders one last time. Her heart tears open with every step the guards take away from her. Her sons turn back again and again, their eyes clinging to her until they disappear beyond the palace gate. And then the world goes quiet. RIZPAH collapses to the ground. Her hands press against the earth as though she might dig through it and pull her children back from their fate by sheer will alone. But there is no power in her hands to stop death. She lies there, trembling, listening to the fading footsteps of the guards leading her boys away. And she understands a truth that shatters her soul. Grief does not kill the living. It forces them to live on, broken and burning, while the world keeps moving forward without mercy. That is the moment RIZPAH becomes more than a concubine, more than a mother, more than a woman crushed by loss. That is the moment she becomes a fire that will not die, not even when the night falls, not even when the vultures come, not even when the world forgets the names of the sons she loved, because RIZPAH will not forget. She will not let anyone forget, and her fight is only just beginning. The morning of the execution dawns with a sky that looks bruised, as though even the heavens are grieving. The air is unnaturally still. No breeze moves the trees. No birds dare to sing. It is the kind of silence that comes before something terrible, the kind that presses on the chest like a stone. The 7 young men's sons, nephews, grandsons of Saul's bloodline are brought out of the city in a slow, merciless procession. Their hands are bound, but their legs are free, for the Gibeonites want them to walk the final steps on their own. Soldiers surround them in heavy lines, spears angled, faces hard, their duty outweighing any sympathy. Behind the soldiers trail the families, mothers, sisters, wives, cousins, broken shapes moving like shadows. Grief has bent their backs. Their tears have carved rivers down their cheeks. A low, unending wail follows the procession, rising and falling like waves crashing against cliffs. RIZPAH walks at the center of them all, her face pale, her body trembling, but her steps unwavering. She refuses to be carried. She refuses to be left behind. Her sons walk just ahead, Armoni, tall, and trying to appear strong. Mephibosheth, pale but determined not to collapse. Their eyes search for her constantly, as though drawing strength from her presence. RIZPAH'S hands shake violently as she reaches out and manages to link her fingers with theirs. For a brief moment, a fragile chain between mother and sons. She holds on as tightly as she can, the only barrier left between her and the storm about to rip her world apart. She whispers their names like a prayer. "I am here," she says. "I am with you. Do not be afraid." But the soldiers notice, and they pry her fingers away from theirs one by one. She fights them, her voice cracking, body straining against the iron grip of the guards. "No, please. Let me hold them. Let me walk with them." But the soldiers must obey orders. Her sons look back helplessly as the distance grows between them, and RIZPAH'S heart tears with every step. The road to the hill is long. Dry dust rises beneath their feet, coating faces and clothes like a shroud. The sun begins to break through the clouds, harsh and indifferent, illuminating the barren place chosen for their deaths, a rocky hill, empty of shade, empty of mercy. At the top of the hill stand 7 wooden stakes. The Gibeonites wait there like carved stone, their faces expressionless. They do not hate these boys. They are not executing them out of rage, but out of justice demanded by blood spilled long before these sons were born. Their calmness makes it worse. Grief can rage against hatred, but how does one rage against cold, dispassionate duty? RIZPAH reaches the base of the hill as the soldiers lead the young men upward. She stumbles to her knees, clutching the earth, watching helplessly as the distance widens. The world tilts. Her breath comes in gasps, each one sharper than the last. One of her sons turns, Mephibosheth. The wind lifts his hair from his face as he searches for her in the crowd. His eyes meet hers. "Mother," he cries, voice cracking. RIZPAH tries to climb the hill, but a soldier steps in her path. She collapses against him, pounding her fists against his armor, wailing with a grief so deep it makes even the hardest men flinch. "Please," she sobs, "do not take them from me. Not like this, not like this." But the soldier cannot move. He cannot help her. He can only stand there, rigid as her cries tear through the sky. The Gibeonites bind the boys to the stakes. The ropes scrape their skin. Their legs tremble, but they do not scream. They press their heads back, eyes closed, trying to summon courage from whatever remains within them. Then the executions begin. The first sound is the thud of wood stakes driven deeper into the hard ground. The second is the sharp snap of ropes tightening. And then the cries, not from the boys, from their families, from RIZPAH most of all, whose scream tears the sky apart. "No, my sons, my babies." Her voice is so raw, so full of agony that even the birds circling overhead scatter. The Gibeonites carry out the execution swiftly, efficiently. They do not prolong suffering, but death is death, and the hill echoes with the sound of final breath, fading heartbeat, the body slackening against the ropes. RIZPAH watches everything. Her heart breaks, but her eyes do not close. She refuses to look away even when others turn their faces to the ground. She watches as the last breath slips from Armoni's lips, as Mephibosheth's head falls forward, as the light leaves their eyes. The world stands still. And then comes the final cruelty. The Gibeonites walk down the hill, leaving the bodies behind. Israel's law and the Gibeonite demand are clear. There will be no burial, no covering, no final dignity. The executed boys will hang there, exposed to sun and storm, to birds and beasts, a fate worse than death. The families collapse, wailing in despair, but they are herded away before they can approach the bodies. Some faint, some shout. Some fall into silent shock, but RIZPAH does not faint. She does not collapse. She walks slowly, painfully up the stony hill. The soldiers, stunned by her resolve, do not stop her. Perhaps they see that grief has become her armor. Perhaps they know nothing can harm her now more than what she has already lost. She reaches the stake where her sons hang. Her hands tremble as she touches the wood. Her tears fall onto the dusty ground. She presses her forehead against the rough surface and sobs until she cannot breathe. The world around her fades. The voices fade, the soldiers fade. There is only the wind, the bodies, the unbearable emptiness inside her. And then RIZPAH makes a decision that will echo through the generations. If the world has condemned her sons to hang here without honor, then she will stay. She will guard them. She will protect them from every bird, every beast, every storm. For however long it takes, days, weeks, months, she will not leave them. Because love, true, fierce, burning love, does not end at death. And so begins RIZPAH'S vigil. A vigil that will shake a king. A vigil that will move a nation. A vigil that heaven itself will not ignore. When the soldiers finally leave, and the last echo of footsteps fades into the wind, RIZPAH stands alone on the barren hilltop with her sons' bodies hanging above her. The sun is sinking, spilling red light across the sky like blood poured out upon the earth. The world looks wounded, and RIZPAH feels every ache of that wound inside her chest. For a long moment, she just stares. The sight before her is too big, too terrible, too real for her mind to grasp. Her breath trembles, her knees buckle. And then the dam inside her heart bursts. She falls. Not gently, she collapses to the ground like a tree cut from its roots. Dust rises around her, clinging to her hair, her face, her clothes. She presses her palms into the earth as though she could claw her way out of her own agony. But pain pins her down. A sound tears from her throat raw, broken, primal. She screams until her lungs burn. She screams until her voice shreds into hoarse fragments. Her cries echo off the stones, rebound against the stakes, and vanish into the darkening sky. "God," she cries, "why? Why my sons? Why my babies?" Her fingers claw at the ground until her nails split. She beats the earth with her fists, then with the sides of her hands, then with her open palms. Dust stains her skin, but she does not stop. She rocks back and forth, her body racked with sobs so violent they threaten to tear her apart. The sky deepens into twilight. Shadows stretch long over the hill. The wind begins to rise, carrying the distant howl of wolves waking for the night. RIZPAH hears them. Her tears stop, not because she is done crying, but because fear spikes through her like lightning. Wolves, hyenas, birds of prey. This hill is no safe place. And the bodies of her sons, her babies, her flesh are hanging defenseless. The thought shatters her. "No," she whispers, "not them. Not now. You will not touch them." Her grief, which moments before had crushed her, now begins to kindle, slowly, weakly, like a flame struggling against the wind, but a flame nonetheless. She literally crawls up the slope toward the stakes. Her movements are clumsy, her body trembling so violently she can barely hold herself upright. When she reaches the base of the wooden beams, she pulls herself into a sitting position and leans against the rough wood. There she breaks again. She wraps her arms around herself, rocking, weeping, shaking uncontrollably. She calls her sons' names over and over Armoni, Mephibosheth, as though the repetition could hold them even in death. Hours pass. The sky turns black. Stars appear distant and cold. The night wind grows sharp enough to slice through her thin clothes. She shivers, teeth chattering, but she does not move. She cannot leave. She will not leave. At some point she does not know when her cries become whispers, then silence. Her body sags against the stake, her head resting on her arm. Her tears dry on her cheeks, leaving salt trails behind. She is empty, utterly emptied. And for a moment she considers letting herself sink into that emptiness, to stay there, to never rise again. But then a sound reaches her ears, a flutter, a rustle, feathers. A vulture lands on a nearby rock. RIZPAH'S eyes snap open. Another bird circles overhead. And another. The night is coming alive with predators. Something inside her shifts, like a broken bone resetting, like a woman remembering who she is. Slowly, so slowly, she feels each muscle. Rebel RIZPAH pushes herself to her feet. Her legs shake beneath her, but she stands. She wipes her face with trembling hands. She draws a breath that tastes of dust and sorrow and iron resolve. Then she picks up a fallen branch. She grips it like a weapon. Her voice is weak and raw, but it rises in a rasped whisper. You will not have them. Not while I live. When the first vulture swoops, she swings the branch with all the strength left in her. The bird veers away with an angry cry. Wolves gather on the edges of the hill, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. But RIZPAH spreads her arms wide, branch in hand, and screams at them, a sound that is more fury than fear. She is only one woman, one broken, grieving, exhausted woman. But she becomes a wall, a shield, a mother whose love is fiercer than death. And something extraordinary happens. She rises. Not physically, her body barely holds together, but internally, spiritually, she becomes a blaze against the darkness. Her sons may be dead, but her devotion is not. And she chooses in that moment not to surrender to despair, not to abandon them to the cruelty of exposure. She stands on trembling feet, raises her branch, and faces the night. Her voice is cracked, but her resolve is steel. I am here, she whispers to her sons. I will guard you. I will not leave you alone. And so RIZPAH, the grieving mother, the broken woman, begins the impossible vigil that will shake a king and change the fate of a nation. RIZPAH does not move from the hill. She spreads a rough piece of sackcloth across a jagged rock, a fragile barrier between her body and the cold, unyielding stone. She lowers herself onto it with trembling arms, her knees scraping against the dust, her fingers clutching at loose gravel, as if the earth itself might slip away beneath her. The wind cuts through her hair, and the scent of the dry hill, the dust, and the bodies before her fills her nose. She inhales it anyway, steadying herself. She decides in that moment of unbearable grief that she will not leave. She will not abandon them, not for a moment. Her sons' bodies are exposed. The vultures circle, the wild dogs prowl, the wolves linger at the edges of the hill. But she will not falter. She will not blink. She will guard them with the only weapon she has, her living body, her broken flesh, her unyielding love. Day after day, the sun rises, relentless, beating down on her unprotected skin. Her face darkens, burnt by the white-hot glare. Her lips crack and bleed, dry and raw from thirst. The sackcloth scratches at her arms, but she does not flinch. She moves her feet to chase away the animals that dare approach, stones clattering against the ground as she hurls them with aching arms. Her hands blister, her feet bleed, her back aches. Hunger gnaws at her stomach, yet she refuses to leave the hill for food, refusing even the comfort of a sip of water. Every time the wind blows, carrying dust and debris, she leans forward, shielding the bodies with her arms, whispering her sons' names under her breath. Harmony, Mephibosheth. The heat of the day is unbearable, yet she endures. The sun is an enemy. The stone beneath her is an enemy. The air itself is harsh, burning her lungs with every breath. And yet, for every step backward that the world takes against her, RIZPAH moves forward. She will not falter. She will not surrender. The animals circle, but she faces them with a courage that surprises even herself. She waves branches, throws stones, shouts, screams, her voice raw and broken, but it carries power. She is a mother, and nothing in the world can break that. Night falls, but she does not rest. The cold bites her bones. Will's eyes glimmer from the darkness. She huddles close to the bodies, clutching the sackcloth around her shoulders. and presses her cheek against the dry stone. She feels the night wind whip her hair, cutting her face with every gust, but she does not move. She whispers prayers into the darkness. She pleads with God for mercy, for justice, for protection for the sons he has allowed to be taken from her. Her voice is so quiet, so fragile, that it is almost swallowed by the wind, but it reaches heaven, and in the stillness of the night, there is an understanding there. RIZPAH'S vigil stretches into days and then weeks. Her body begins to fade into the hill itself, but her spirit burns brighter than ever. The hill, once desolate and barren, becomes a place of holy defiance, a silent fortress of love and loyalty that refuses to yield. And so she remains unbroken, unrelenting, her presence a shield over the bodies of her sons. Each sunrise is a test, each sunset a victory. Each night the dark and cold press against her, and she presses back, unflinching. Her vigil has begun, and it will not end until justice is done, until the kingdom sees what grief, love, and devotion can endure, even in the face of deity itself. Night falls over the barren hill, thick and unrelenting. Darkness stretches like a living thing, swallowing everything in its path. The wind bites at RIZPAH'S face, slipping through her hair and chilling her bones. Wolves cry in the distance, their voices echoing across the empty landscape, a reminder that death and danger prowl, even when humans cannot see them. Their howls twist and rise with the wind, long, mournful, carrying a menace that sets her teeth on edge. She sits rigidly on the rough sackcloth, her eyes straining to catch every movement in the shadows. Every sound is amplified, the snapping of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the soft footfalls of unseen creatures approaching. Hyenas creep forward, drawn by the smell of the bodies above her. She springs to her feet, grabbing sticks, stones, anything within reach. Her arms ache as she hurls them toward the advancing shapes, her voice rising into the night in a raw scream that is both prayer and defiance. "Begone! You shall not touch them. Not while I breathe." Her hands blister from swinging branches, her arms grow heavy, but she does not stop. Not once. The night stretches endlessly. She shifts, moving along the hill to intercept any approaching threat, shouting, throwing, screaming, never allowing herself a single moment of rest. Her body burns with exhaustion, yet her mind is sharp with purpose. She will guard them with her life. She will not fail. Not now. Not ever. Then dawn creeps over the horizon, gray and fragile at first, but slowly lightening into the harsh glare of the sun. With it, vultures appear, wheeling above in menacing circles. Their wings blot out pieces of the sky, casting shadowed ovals on the ground that make RIZPAH'S stomach twist. She throws herself forward, rocks flying from her arms, branches swinging in wide, desperate arcs. She screams again, a voice hoarse and shredded, warning them, threatening them, commanding them. Not one bird may land. Not one may touch her sons. Every instinct in her body, every ounce of fear and grief channels into action. She is a storm, a tempest, a mother whose fury rivals the elements themselves. The vultures hesitate, swoop, and retreat, but always return. And she meets them each time with equal ferocity, relentless, unstoppable, a living shield over the bodies of the innocent. Then come the storms. The rains arrive without warning, rolling in from the distant mountains. Cold sheets of water pummel the hill, soaking her through to the skin. Her clothes cling to her, heavy and dripping, chilling her to the bone. Her hair sticks to her face, mud and rain smearing across her cheeks, mixing with the dried salt of old tears. Lightning splits the sky, thunder shattering the silence in explosive roars. She trembles not with fear, but with cold and exhaustion, but she does not leave. She does not falter. She leans into the wind, pressing herself low against the stones, gripping the sackcloth, gripping the earth, gripping the memory of her sons, and whispers a prayer into the storm. Protect them. Lord, guard them, God, I am here. Her vigil does not go unnoticed. Travelers pass the hill, murmuring under their breath, "Is she mad?" One asks, voice tinged with fear, "Is she cursed?" Another whispers, clutching a staff and shaking her head. Some, though, look at her with awe and uncertainty. "Is she holy?" they ask, sensing the fierceness of her devotion, the impossible courage it takes to stay atop that hill through heat, cold, hunger, and storm. A few bring her water, leaving it at a distance, hoping she will accept it, though they do not dare approach her too closely. They see the fierce determination in her eyes, the way her body shields the bodies above her, and they sense that she will not allow anything to disturb them, not man, not beast, not God's wrath. Day after day, night after night, she remains. Her hands crack from the repeated throwing of stones. Her skin is raw, sunburned, and rain-soaked. Her hair hangs in clumps, matted and tangled. Her lips bleed. Her stomach growls with hunger, yet she does not move. She does not sleep. She does not leave. She has become one with the hill, one with the bodies she guards, a sentinel of grief and devotion that refuses to yield. And as the days pass, the impossible begins to take shape. The hill, once barren and empty, becomes a place of witness, a place of reverence, though no one else dares call it such aloud. Her vigil stretches the boundaries of human endurance. Her cries, her anger, her sorrow, her defiance echo across the hills and valleys of Israel, carried on the wind, stirring hearts and haunting the conscience of a kingdom. RIZPAH'S vigil is more than grief, it is a challenge, a demand that the world remember. A force of love so fierce that not even death itself dares approach her sons. And she will not stop, not for a single night, not for a single storm, not until justice is finally done. Word of RIZPAH'S vigil begins to travel. At first it is whispered along village roads, carried by travelers and merchants passing through the region. "Have you seen the woman on the hill?" they murmur to one another. "She sits atop the rocks, night and day, guarding the bodies of her sons." At markets and crossroads the stories grow. Some shake their heads in disbelief. "Surely she is mad," they say. Others pause, awestruck. Could any mother endure such grief? Could any heart hold such devotion? People come from distant towns, lingering at the base of the hill, watching from afar, careful not to disturb her. They see the thin, worn figure silhouetted against the blazing sun or the pale moon, small against the barren stones, but unyielding. She does not acknowledge them. She does not speak to them. She has no time for curiosity. Her sons hang above her, exposed, and every moment that she is absent could bring death or desecration. Yet her presence becomes legend. People carry her story from town to town, whispering her name like a prayer or a warning. RIZPAH, the mother who will not yield. Months pass. The barley harvest arrives, then fades. The golden stalks of grain sway in the wind, indifferent to the mother who kneels among rocks and dust. Summer scorches the land, relentless heat bending the air, cracking the ground. RIZPAH'S skin darkens, her lips bleed, her hands blister from the rough sackcloth, her feet raw and worn from walking the stony hill to chase away animals. She never sleeps for more than a few moments, curled against the stones to protect her sons from night predators. The autumn rains finally arrive, cold and unrelenting. The water soaks her through, seeping into her clothes, chilling her bones, washing away what little warmth remains in her body. Yet she does not leave. She does not cry out for herself. She does not think of comfort. She is entirely consumed by the task that has become her life, her devotion, her defiance. 6 months pass in this rhythm of grief and vigilance. 6 months of exposure to the sun, the rain, the wind, the beasts, and the eyes of the world. 6 months of watching, waiting, defending, praying, and enduring. 6 months of defiance against death itself, against time itself, against a kingdom that had demanded her sons' lives. And through it all, she remains unbroken. Her eyes never leave the bodies. Her hands never cease their protective movements. Her spirit never falters. She has become a living monument, a silent testament that love, even in the face of unbearable loss, can endure. That grief can become strength. That devotion can change the heart of a nation. Stories of her courage spread, carried on the wind, whispered in homes and marketplaces and in palaces. Some marvel, some tremble, some pray. The name RIZPAH becomes legend, a word spoken with awe and respect, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of injustice, the fierce love of a mother can light the way. The news comes to David not through the palace scribes or the court officials, but through a traveler, a weary man, who has journeyed across hills and valleys to report what he has seen. He kneels before the king, breathless, dust clinging to his robes. His eyes widen as he speaks, each word trembling with awe and fear. "My lord," he says, voice low and reverent, "there is a woman on the hill of Gibeah. She has been there for months, your majesty. Guarding the bodies of the 7 sons, she has not moved. Not for heat, not for cold, not for wind, not for rain, not for beasts that circle. She sits, she stands, she walks, she fights to keep them safe. Day and night she has not left." David feels the words sink into him like stones thrown into water. The ripples spread quickly, reaching the depths of his conscience, awakening guilt he cannot escape. The famine, the cries of the Gibeonites, the oath he swore, they all come crashing into him now. But it is this woman, this single, grieving mother, whose endurance shakes him to his core. He closes his eyes and feels the weight of what has been done. The cruelty of leaving the sons of Saul unburied, 7 lives offered to satisfy the wrath of ancient wrongs sinks into him like a leaden cloak. That night David cannot rest. He mounts his horse quietly, away from the bustle of the palace, away from the songs of the guards and the lights of the city. The darkness of the hills surrounds him. The wind cuts across his face. Each step of his horse carries him closer to the place of grief and courage, closer to the woman who has made a vow stronger than death itself. He rides with thoughts of the 7 boys, imagining the suffering, imagining the months of exposure and neglect, imagining the anguish that no king should ever witness. At last he reaches the foot of the hill. He dismounts quietly, the horse's hooves silent on the rocky ground. And then he sees her. She is thin, so thin that her bones seem almost outlined beneath her clothes. Her hair hangs in tangled, mud-streaked strands. Her skin is darkened from the sun, raw from wind and rain, blistered and cracked from the endless vigil. She trembles with exhaustion. Her hands are raw from stones and branches. Her feet are swollen and cut. Yet she stands. She is standing, not sitting, not collapsed, not fainted, standing, and her eyes find him immediately. Those eyes, burning, fierce, unyielding, look at him with a fire that no fatigue, no suffering, no sorrow could ever extinguish. They are the eyes of a mother who has loved beyond reason, who has fought beyond endurance, who has defied death itself to protect the flesh of her own heart. David feels the heat of that gaze as if it scorches him from across the hill. It is a gaze that pierces through his title, his crown, his authority, straight into the marrow of his being. For a moment he cannot speak. His knees feel weak. The wind seems to hush around them. The vultures have not yet returned, sensing perhaps the presence of something greater than themselves. He feels guilt, shame, awe, and wonder collide in a single, unrelenting wave. She does not move to greet him. She does not kneel. She does not plead. She simply stands, a sentinel of grief and love, her eyes blazing with unspoken questions and unyielding demands. Why did it take so long for justice to come? Why did you allow this cruelty? And now, will you finally do what is right? David swallows, voice thick with emotion when he finally speaks. Rizpah, your devotion, your courage. I am ashamed it took me so long to act. He steps closer, the weight of kingship pressing down on him, but also the vulnerability of a man who has witnessed something greater than all crowns and palaces. She says nothing. She does not need to. Her presence speaks louder than words. In that moment, the king realizes the magnitude of her vigil, the magnitude of her love. The months of suffering, the nights spent fending off beasts, the relentless sun and driving rain, all of it has led to this confrontation. The mother who refused to bend, who refused to leave, has forced him to confront his own humanity, his own responsibility, and the sacredness of life that even kings cannot disregard. And so, standing on that hill, with the wind in their faces, the stones beneath their feet, and the bodies of the 7 sons above them, a quiet reckoning begins. David will not leave without righting this wrong, and Rizpah will not leave until justice is fulfilled. Their meeting is wordless in many ways, yet speaks more than any proclamation, more than any royal decree. A mother as love can awaken even the heart of a king. Her vigil was over. No more chasing vultures with bleeding feet. No more screaming into the night to scare off wolves. No more leaning into storms with trembling arms raised to shield her sons. For the first time since the day they were taken from her, she allowed herself to exhale a long, broken breath that carried 6 months of agony with it. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes following the movement of the soldiers as they wrapped each body with a gentleness she had not dared hope for. These were not the rough, hurried motions of executioners. These were careful hands, tender hands guided by a king who had finally remembered compassion. Rizpah pressed her trembling palms to her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "to God, to David, to the skies that had witnessed her anguish, to the sons who could finally rest." Her love, her endurance, her unyielding devotion had moved a king. In the silence of that hill, her victory was as mighty as any battle Israel had ever won. The royal procession began soon after. Word spread quickly, and people gathered along the road as the bodies were carried with honor, something they had been denied for far too long. Soldiers marched with solemn steps, their armor glinting in the sun. Priests walked beside them, chanting soft prayers. Torches were lit even though it was day, symbolizing the light of dignity returning to those once disgraced. David himself walked in front, head bowed, not as a triumphant ruler, but as a man humbled by the courage of a grieving mother. Behind him followed the wrapped remains of Saul and Jonathan, retrieved from Jabesh Gilead, honored at last after years in foreign soil. The past, with all its wounds and betrayals, was being carried forward toward healing. Rizpah walked with the procession. Her steps were slow, unsteady, but filled with a solemn pride. She was not a concubine now, not a forgotten woman in the palace shadows. She was a mother whose love had changed the course of a nation. They finally reached the family tomb, the resting place of Kish, Saul's father. Priests prepared the burial site, smoothing the stones, burning incense, and lifting prayers to heaven. One by one, the bones and bodies were lowered into the earth with reverence. There were no rushed movements, no dismissive gestures, only honor, only dignity. As the last stone was placed over the tomb, sealing it, a hush fell across the crowd, A sense of peace, heavy, tender, sacred, settled over the place like a blessing. RIZPAH stood before the tomb, tears sliding silently down her weary face. Her sons, once left to the mercy of beasts and storms, were now enveloped in the embrace of their ancestors. They were home. For the first time in months, RIZPAH felt her heart grow still. Not healed, no mother's heart fully heals from such a wound, but quiet. Her vigil had ended. Her love had endured. And because of her, justice had met compassion at last. When the burial was finished and the last stone was pressed into place, an expectant hush spread across the land as though all creation itself was holding its breath. For 3 long years, Israel had known only hunger, dust, and despair. The sky had been a hard, unyielding bronze. The earth had cracked under the weight of heat and judgment. Rivers had thinned to muddy threads. Children had cried through nights of empty bowls. Mothers had prayed over barren fields. Farmers had walked their lands with hopeless eyes, finding nothing but brittle stalks and wilted vines. But now something shifted. The wind changed first softly, gently. A coolness brushed across the fields like a whisper of mercy returning. The leaves of the fig trees trembled. The air tasted different, alive again. People paused in their work, looking up as clouds began to gather on the horizon, slow and heavy and dark with promise. Then, after years of silence, one drop fell. Just one, tapping the parched earth like the first note of a long-forgotten song. Then another, and another, and before anyone could speak, the sky opened. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching the land that had waited so long. It soaked into the cracked soil, swelling it with life. It drummed on rooftops, splashed into empty jars, rolled down the faces of men and women who lifted their hands and wept openly in the streets. Children ran laughing through the puddles. Farmers dropped to their knees in the fields, letting the water wash over their skin. Shepherds lifted their faces to heaven, shouting praises, as the dry riverbeds began to rumble with returning streams. Israel breathed again. The famine that once strangled the land loosened its grip. The curses that had weighed upon the nation dissolved beneath the cleansing rain. Grain would grow again. Trees would bear fruit. Flocks would multiply. The drought had ended not by chance, but by mercy, by justice restored, by the unseen hand that had waited for compassion to rise from a mother's vigil. And as the rain continued to fall, soaking hilltops and valleys alike, peace settled over Israel like a soft garment. Not the fragile peace of politics or human agreements, but a deep, holy calm born of righteousness finally met. The land drank. The sky smiled. And the people knew the anger of God had passed, and his blessing had returned. In the years that followed, long after the rains had returned and the famine had faded into memory, the story of RIZPAH began to grow quietly, at first, carried from village to village by travelers who had passed the hill, then retold around fires, then whispered to children at night. Her name drifted across Israel like a sacred wind, settling into the hearts of all who heard it. RIZPAH'S vigil became more than a memory. It became a legend. Women spoke of her with awe. Mothers would gather their little ones close and say, "Listen and never forget." There was once a woman who guarded her sons even after death tried to steal them away, and the children would listen wide-eyed, imagining the lone figure on the rocky hill, chasing vultures with burning branches, standing against storms with nothing but grief and love to hold her upright. Elders in the towns told her story during the long winter nights, nodding gravely as they described the months she endured, the heat, the wolves, the rain, and how her courage had reached the ears of a king. Shepherds who knew the loneliness of watching through the night spoke of her with quiet respect. And women who had lost children laid their hands over their hearts when her name was mentioned, finding in her story a reflection of their own pain and an ember of hope. RIZPAH became a symbol, one that did not fade with time. She became the symbol of love that never gives up, the kind that endures fire, famine, shame, and silence. The love that stands when strength is gone, that fights when the world expects surrender. She became the symbol of justice that demands compassion, the reminder that righteousness is not complete until mercy stands beside it. Her vigil taught a nation that even in the pursuit of justice, humanity must never be forgotten. And she became the symbol of a voice that changes the heart of a king, a woman with no title, no wealth, no army, yet her silent suffering spoke louder than the loudest generals. A mother's grief turned the course of a kingdom. Her faithfulness opened heaven's hand once more and brought peace back to the land. Generations passed, but RIZPAH'S story did not fade. It lived in the songs of storytellers and the lessons of rabbis, in the hearts of mothers who prayed fiercely for their children. Her vigil, the lonely, heartbreaking 6-month stand of a mother on a hill, became eternal. And as her story reached its final echo, it carried with it one powerful truth, one that still speaks across ages and nations. She had no army. She had no husband. She had no strength left in her bones, but she had love. And love made her unshakable.